pancake day. Yes, it's pancake day. Yes, it's pancake day. Well, it's pancake day. It's really pancake day. Yes, it's pancake day. Now the merry men know about pancake making, because pancake day is a regular fixture. You take your frying pan and some sugar and jam and get on down to make the mixture. Well, you take a dozen eggs, you take a cup of milk, and don't forget to add a little flour, and then you beat it up with a wooden spoon and leave it to settle for just 1 hour, because it's pancake day. Yes, it's pancake day. Yes, it's pancake day. Well, it's pancake day. It's crucial pancake day. Yes, it's pancake day. But back in the village's workshop, where the living ain't so funny, they make their pancakes out of dirty old mud, because they ain't got no flipping money. Their smiles are wide, because the tears they hide, even though their life is hell. But the smiles stop the fall when the sheriff comes to call, and he brings King John as well.
What on earth are those filthy peasants doing with that disgusting slop?
I think it's Pancake Day. Yes, it's Pancake Day. It must be Pancake Day.
Well, you better get us a frying pan then, hadn't you?
Certainly, sire. Anything you say, sire. 1 frying pan coming up, sire. You scum! Over here, please. Hurry up.
Happy
Hello.
Pancake Day!
Happy Pancake Day, indeed.
Happy Fat Tuesday!
It's Pancake Day.
Yes, it's
Pancake Day.
That's it. I love translating it from the French. Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday. Happy Fat Tuesday, everybody.
Does Pancake Day translate into? I mean, do other cultures do the pancake thing really?
In Australia, we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do the Americans know what Pancake Day is?
I'm sure. Don't you?
Every
Bill.
day's a Pancake Day in America,
Bill
isn't
Lovell.
it?
Bill Lovell. Do you have Pancake Day in
Pancakes for
Texas?
breakfast all the time.
You guys are crazy. Like pancakes and bacon and waffles and maple syrup.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah.
When we went to New York, I had pancakes with bacon like every morning.
Well,
It was good.
every day is
Yep.
Fat Tuesday in America.
Totally.
What's Bill said? Bill has commented.
What on earth is this? he's
Shrove
saying?
Tuesday, yes, okay, yes. Bill
Pancake
has
Day.
corrected us. Pancake Day.
Yeah, Pancake Day.
Although I do feel a slight twinge when I go into the supermarket and it says International Pancake Day, and I just think I wonder if they're going to tell us that it's now 46 days from International Chocolate Egg Day.
Yep.
That would be Easter.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Bill Lovell says I'm having pancakes right now.
See, as I say, it's the American thing to have for breakfast.
Enjoy
That and grits.
grits.
Not that I still don't really know
Gotta
what grits
get me
is.
some grits.
Like,
I was in the South for like 2.5 days before I started saying y'all.
y'all.
It was amazing. It was
Yeah.
amazing. I just
We've got a friend who moved to Texas, and she sounds like that now, but she's from Ramsbottom. So, so you can kind of imagine how that works for the kind of southern y'all.
hey, I want some grits. I'm from Ramsbottom. Yeah. But it is Shrove Tuesday, from the Old English shrive, meaning to be penitent, right? Because here's something interesting. So Lent begins tomorrow with Ash Wednesday, and we'll think about that in a second. But I think it's very interesting culturally how from that idea of Lent and a penitential fast leading up to Easter, you have 2 different responses. One of them is to have Fat Tuesday! Woo! It's Mardi Gras, it's Carnivale, and, it's a massive blowout.
Yep.
And then the other response is to be shriven and to be penitent and to enter,
yes.
to make sure that you have repented enough so that you can enter into 40 days of penitence so that then you might be ready for the cross.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just shows how kind of human religion leads to you either get rebels or robots, don't you? And the one response is Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, let's have all the pancakes. And the other is let us be even more holy to
Yep.
prepare ourselves for the season of holiness so that we might just be ready to hear the good news of Jesus dying for us. And it just makes me think, like in the Old Testament, there was a sort of a penitential season in the Old Testament, the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Yeah.
So the Feast of Unleavened Bread is scouring your house for any traces of yeast, because yeast meant if you want your bread to rise on the night of Passover, you're basically saying, I want to bed down in Egypt. I'm not really with this whole, escape route from Egypt. I want to bed down. I want to feast in Egypt. And so having yeast is always a sign of being too comfortable with the old life and not wanting to be part of God's, great exodus. And so you would have a week in the Old Testament called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where you would scour your house for yeast, but also you would examine yourself. What is it about me that loves Egypt a little bit too much?
Sure.
But interestingly, that week happens before Passover or after Passover?
After.
After Passover.
Yeah.
So once you've celebrated the fact that you are redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, you've been set free, you're part of God's new people, hooray, then you do the
Then's
self-examination.
Yeah.
And actually, Paul picks that up in 1 Corinthians 5, and he says, Christ our Passover Lamb has been sacrificed, therefore let us partake of the feast of unleavened bread, with without the yeast of malice, right?
Yeah.
And so again, in the New Testament, it's basically saying, sure, do some self-examination, but it's in the light of the fact that Christ has already been sacrificed for you.
Yeah.
Whereas these days, we tend to, if you get to the end of the penitential feast, then you get the Christ sacrifice.
So like, where has that even come from? Like, where is where does, I don't really know where Lent comes from. I mean, you get the 40 days thing, you can kind of see where that's come from, but when do people start saying, let's do this in advance? Like, where's that grown out of?
Well, part of it was, so you want to get baptized on Easter Day, right? Okay, that was kind of a thing. The best day on which to celebrate your new birth and life and entrance into the church would be Easter, right?
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
And so, like, anyone who was joining the church, they were like a catechumen, and they would be catechized. They would be told, catechism. Come on.
Yeah, it's not often you hear the word catechumen.
Catechumen,
like a
Yeah.
cucumber or something.
You
The
become-
vegetable section.
You become a cucumber. And cattle cucumber. Cake or death, cattle cucumber. Bill's commenting on a totally different video stream, so I need to
Stop it, Bill. Stop.
come on over to the Speak Life video, Bill.
Join us here, Bill.
Join us on the Speak Life video. But he's just given everybody a wonderful pancakes video. So come and drop that into the Speak Life video comment stream, Bill, and then everyone can enjoy it.
It's going to make me hungry for pancakes.
Yeah, it probably is.
Oh, man.
So anyway, catechumen. So you would come in and you would be catechized, which is a question and answer way of teaching the faith.
Yep.
And you would prepare yourself for your baptism. So to begin with, it was all those who are about to be baptized.
So it's like baptism prep.
It's baptism prep, right?
Right.
But then the whole church said, well, why don't we all do it? And why don't we all, in solidarity with those who are about to renounce evil and embrace Christ, why don't we all kind of do that? And it sort of grew from there.
Grown out of that.
And then you get people like Simeon the Stylite, who would literally... Oh, he's great.
Stylish.
Stylite, because like you know that a stylus, like if you've got a
Like
Galaxy
like
Pro,
a writing thing. Yeah.
is like a long thin thing, a stylus, right?
Yeah.
And he was a stylite because he put himself up on a
Oh, and
stylus,
he stood up on the
Like
top of the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
like a pillar, a column,
Yeah.
right? And he went up there, and he didn't come down for like 46 years, something like that. Right?
You're just waiting for someone to bring a ladder. It's just like.
Well, he was considered like the wisest man in Syria,
Yeah.
and everyone would come and listen to the wisdom, because if he's able to do that, imagine the wisdom that would drop from his mouth.
Oh, I'm just thinking, what else would have to drop off of there? Like if he was
Yeah.
46 years.
Yeah.
Crikey.
46 Syrian summers, 46 Syrian winters, and he survived on flatbread and yogurt for...
Oh, no, that's not going to be good.
I think it's 46 years. I'll have to have a look. Eric Neal says, cheers from Cowtown, Texas.
There we go.
I want my wife to say that. Cowtown, Texas. Something like that. Hello to Northern Irish people,
Yeah.
too. You're very welcome.
Rapidly switching off.
Biddy Mutter says, hello, Biddy. As does Roger Marshall. So,
Aloha.
hello. So anyway, I'll finish the Simeon the Stylite.
Getting distracted.
Simeon the Stylite. So before he proved his great holiness, and before he spawned a whole bunch of other Stylites,
Yeah.
right? Other people in his wake then decided to do this thing. He was like the most famous man in Syria. So everyone else wanted to be a Stylite, and they went up and
Stood on a
did the
pillar.
same thing. But they would do things like literally hold out from all food during Lent. Now you do have feast days during Lent, so like the
Sure,
Sundays
like
of
Sundays, yeah.
Sunday's your feast day, and there's like St. Patrick's Day. Does that fall probably falls in Lent this year.
Don't know.
So there would be feast days where you could kind of break it up, but that was what all the cool kids were doing back in the day, and we
It was
we
the
give up chocolate.
WWJD bracelet of its day. you
Yeah,
know, like
and he would wrap palm fronds around himself just into, like a girdle. Would that be a girdle?
maybe.
What do you call things that hold your gut in?
I suppose a girdle.
Yeah, he would sort of do that until it cut into his flesh and became part of his flesh, and all this kind of.
Where was he getting the palm fronds? I mean, there must have been a team working with him.
Yeah,
Like,
there probably was. There's probably a whole industry.
there are so many questions I have about this. And none of them are really related to His Holiness. Like,
But I think, yeah. So I'm all for preparing yourself for Easter, and I'm all for that kind of thing. But it does go to show that the human heart tends to go in these two different directions. Whether it's Mardi Gras, so it's blow out and let's go for the fat thing, or let's like fast to an unhealthy degree.
what's your opinion? So this is still on the Easter thing, but
Mm-hmm.
we've not talked about this. So what do you think about Good Friday, like services? Because so I wouldn't say I'm massively bothered, but it partly winds me up a little bit. So sometimes we do Good Friday, and you have a Good Friday service almost as if Sunday has not happened.
Right.
As if you were back,
Yeah.
back in 33 AD or 30 AD, whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
almost like you don't know
Yeah.
Sunday's coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know what I make of that. Because basically you just have this very depressing
Yeah.
Friday service. And I'm a bit like, I know Sunday's coming.
Sunday's
But,
coming.
like,
It's Friday,
Fridays are coming.
but Sunday's coming.
But like, we're in a different position to, the disciples on the Saturday and the Friday afternoon, whatnot. I don't know. I just find
Yeah.
it a bit of a strange
Can
thing.
you not for one day enter into the passion of the Christ? Come on, so. So my high church friends would say that. So, like, because I remember
You should enter into the...
you should enter into the story as it happens, and
Okay,
you
I
should
see. Yeah.
and even up to Holy Saturday. Like Holy Saturday in a lot of churches is a very somber affair, and right up to sort of midnight, and you hold a kind of a midnight service in the darkness. Christ is cold and dead in the tomb, and you enter into that, and then it's fireworks on Sunday morning.
Sure.
But they would sort of say the whole reason why we have liturgical calendars is because we are embodied creatures, and we need to kind of enter into the story and enter into these patterns and not smush it all together like it's all in one. And what's interesting to me is that it does seem to be true that we are liturgical creatures, because I don't think we can do without it. Even if nobody knows that it's Shrove Tuesday, the top 3 Twitter trending topics are pancakes, pancake day, it's like, yeah, we even if we do without the church's liturgical calendar, we kind of have to invent our own.
Sure.
And go through it. And is it pageantry? Yes. Is it going through the motions? I guess you could call it that. But we seem to be creatures who need to go through motions because we are embodied. And so, like, we did a mission to a town in Cheshire called Sandbach. And there was lots of things that we sort of did as churches together to reach out to the town. But there was nothing more powerful than actually a passion play that they held on the Friday in the town. So on Good Friday, they had this passion play. And so you have like these, the 12 disciples dressed up, in first century garb, in front of like a chip shop.
Ford Mondeo.
Yeah. And all the cars are driving past. But then actually Christ was strung up on a cross, like right there in the town square.
Yep.
And it really was powerful. And it really did bring home the fact that these are events that apply to now. It's not just a 2,000-year-old thing. But with these passion plays, what happens is Christ dies and there's no resurrection scene.
Yeah.
Because you got to wait for Sunday.
Sure.
And my reaction is similar to yours to that, because I do want people not to walk away thinking,
Well, yeah,
that
exactly.
was
That's
that.
kind of my thing. Like, so
Yeah.
if you come on Friday and you're like, oh, well, I hear something might happen on Sunday.
Yeah.
I'll come back.
Yeah.
And you forget, or you
Yeah.
die. I don't know. Like between Friday and Sunday.
Yes.
I always thought it was just really odd.
Yeah.
It seems
Yeah.
strange that we're kind of almost pretending like we don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
And we've all got to be really
Yeah.
somber about the whole thing.
Yeah.
But
But when read a story to your children, and there's a sad bit, you sort of enter into the sad bit.
Yeah, but I tend to finish the story.
Yeah, that's
Like-
true. Come back in a couple of days, and we'll see what happens to Snow White. I don't know. Yeah.
She went down into death, didn't she?
She went down into death. And then,
Raised to life.
oh, we just watched Beauty and the Beast with Ruby, and it was brilliant because we then played her.
Stockholm syndrome, right there.
Right. Yeah, falling in love with her
Playing out.
captain. Yeah, that's right. She should have had at least a 12-step program, some counselling to sort out all sorts of complicated feelings for her captor. But no, she just jumps in, Anyway, but we watched this with with Ruby, and then we watched a terrific video made by Dan Rackham, who's now working here with us.
One of our very own.
One of our very own. At Speak Live, talking about the gospel themes in Beauty and the Beast. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We'll put that link in the comments later. So Fat Tuesday today. Tomorrow is Ash Wednesday. And before we talk about Ash Wednesday, I thought it was just interesting. It always comes up, and these things are evergreen. Unfortunately, that there are celebrity deaths happening, and celebrity deaths in the news. And Keith Flint of The Prodigy. He died, was it yesterday? Or certainly I heard
It was
of
reported yesterday. I
reported
think it was
yesterday.
yesterday, yeah. Or
And
the
I think-
night before.
And I think Luke Perry of Beverly Hills 90210 fame, he died yesterday. And it just sort of reminded me again about how modern grieving is quite different to traditional grieving. Modern grieving is it's about celebrities we don't really know. And what we're grieving the loss of is their ideas and their media. And what we're missing is their ideas and their media. We're not really missing them because we never had them. They were not,
Sure.
a part of our lives, genuinely. But we still have the feelings of grief. And then we don't really know how to express them, so we just write RIP on Twitter and hit send, and that is the liturgy
Yep.
of grief. But we don't really understand how to grieve anymore because I think we have such a disembodied culture, and because death is kind of out of sight and out of mind for us, So actually, there haven't been very many people close to me who have died. I can't and I'm 40 now, and my parents are still alive. Emma's parents are still alive, and it is the case that for a lot of people, their parents are still alive well into their 60s or 70s.
Yeah, obvious exceptions, but that is very much life expectancy these days, isn't it?
Yeah. And then when people do die, they die away from the family home, in hospices. We have funerals for them. We don't open the caskets. We have a memorial service for them, and then the body gets shipped off for the cremation, and probably only like 5 people are there at the cremation. Just very close
You
family.
don't really see it, do you?
You don't really see that.
I could probably count on... Well, I can count on one hand the number of dead bodies I've seen.
Yeah.
Like
2 I've seen. Actually,
Yeah.
that are
I think
actually dead. Yeah.
3, I think.
Yeah.
I think I've seen my 3 grandparents.
Yeah.
And so when my granddad died, so I got to hospital like 10 minutes after he died. So I was the first one there, and he died 10 minutes before. And it's a very strange thing though. Like, I mean, there was something quite, I was in the room with him because I said, "Oh, well, can I see him?" And I went in, and it was very much this sense of like, well, he wasn't really there. Like it was just a body now. But it just struck me though, like I talk about it being like almost like a comedy, like because my dad was coming and it was his dad, and I just thought like I can't let my dad see him like this. He's there with his eyes open, and you try and close the
like they
eyes
do in
like
the
in
movies.
the films they just do that.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. Doesn't do that. And then like at one point I leant on the side of the bed
Oh.
like that,
Right.
and the the sides that go up and down on the bed.
Wow.
Yeah, and it just collapsed, and so I just ended up falling on my granddad's. Like, but it kind of really humanised the whole whole situation.
Weekend at Bernie's.
It was just like, my goodness, this is like a sitcom playing out here.
Yeah,
You're waiting for
yeah.
the nurse to walk in as I'm trying to like get him in the right position or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I'm just.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, people don't really. I guess a lot of people don't even see.
Yeah.
Some people, I suppose, like my kids wouldn't have gone and seen,
Right.
the
The
dead
open
body of
casket
great granddad or
No.
whatever,
No. Yeah. And do kids come to funerals anymore? Not so much.
Well, yeah, and that's interesting. A lot of people I know have kind of said like, "Oh, and the kids aren't coming." And our kids have come to the funerals, but I mean, obviously they've not been open caskets and things. But
Yeah.
I don't know. You kind of like, well, they're part of the family, so you kind of think, well, why wouldn't they? But
Yeah.
people
yeah.
are very kind of nervous of
Yeah. We don't.
of that.
We don't want to see death, and it is out of sight, out of mind. And yet, like on TV, like all the top Netflix shows are about serial killers, and like every detective series, you've got to go to the morgue, and you've got to see like pictures of buzzsaws opening up people because it's almost pornographic. Like we don't have the real thing,
Yeah, and then
but
morbid
pornographically,
curiosity,
we have
kind
this
of
morbid.
cracking open the
Yeah,
chest cavity to
yeah.
whatever on
Like it's
Silent Witness.
yeah, or any Scandi noir kind of program. We've got this really odd view of death. It's not in our popular consciousness. When Granddad dies, we don't bring him home and put him on the dining room table and have, dinner. Nobody does that. But yeah, we don't really see dead people. We don't really see death, and therefore it's all this virtual thing, and still we grieve, and still we want to grieve, and we want to mourn. But it seems like we mourn celebrities, and we mourn the virtual people out there in the ether, because we don't have that close, intimate knowledge of death within us. And I've said this before. I was on a train at the end of 2018.
Yeah.
Two women in their 20s talking to each other, and one woman says, "Oh, it's been such a crummy year," and her friend says, "Oh, why, babes? What's happened?" She says, "Oh, just with all the deaths. First it was David Bowie, and then it was Alan Rickman." And she said, "Babes, that was 2016." And she said, "Yeah, but I'm sure more people have died this year too." And her entire year had been shaped by the death of David Bowie and Alan Rickman from 2 years previously. And then when she was told that those names are not applicable to this year, she's like, "Oh yeah, but I'll just swap in some other names and I'll just feel sad in this virtual way." So I don't know. It does make me think. Like here's a lovely verse. So Ecclesiastes. And I think this should be such a verse for us. Ecclesiastes 7. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of every man. The living should take this to heart. You're like, yeah, we spend our time doing everything else. We Netflix binge when we should be going to funerals, and we should be facing death in the reality of it. And that's why I think it's interesting that tomorrow is Ash Wednesday.
Yep.
And so certainly if you're from a more traditional background, perhaps you're an Anglican or something, you might go to a service in which they will press the ash of, usually it's the palm crosses that were burnt from last year. They put ash on your forehead and they'll make the sign of the cross over you. And as they do that, they will say, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you will return." You're like, wow, that is embodied. That's like... Because, like, if Luke Perry dies, there's a part of me that's thinking, oh, I'm not too far different from him in age, and maybe I'm confronting my mortality in a very distant kind of way. But when someone actually just presses, ash onto your forehead and says, "That's you, that is," remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. I think we then get a far healthier view of our mortality and that sort of thing.
I think people are just distracted by... There's just so much rubbish. Like social media and all these other things. Just people don't confront reality at all.
Right.
I mean, not even just death, but
Right.
the reality of everyday life.
Right.
I'm always surprised how little people seem to have thought about the big questions of life.
Right.
And I always just kind of assumed, well, everybody is kind of mulling these things over somewhere, aren't they? And no, they're not. Apparently, it doesn't seem they are. Like, and people literally have never given thought to some of these ideas, and like, why am I even here? What's the purpose of things? And
yes,
what about death? And You know, what does that all mean? If this is it, you know, if this really is just it,
Yeah.
why bother? You know,
Right. Well, it's like Blaise Pascal, who's famous for his triangle, Pascal's triangle,
Yeah.
and famous for his wager.
Yes.
But one of the things he did, he wrote a whole bunch of thoughts, and he just numbered them, and he wrote them down in a book. Like if he was during Twitter, like he would
he
just
would have
tweet them
been
out.
a field day for him.
Because they're all kind of 140 characters, 280 characters. But one of the big themes in his thoughts is that diversions. And what he was noticing was that the royalty had to invent diversions because they had gotten themselves above subsistence levels, so they didn't have to worry about where their next meal was coming from, and therefore they were thinking about their mortality. A lot. And so what they needed to do, they needed to go hunting. Like, why do you need to go hunting? It's ridiculous. It's a diversion. And he said something like, man's unhappiness can all be traced back to the fact that we cannot sit quietly with ourselves in a room.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, and what he thought was like thoughts of your mortality are going to rush in. And so you've got to invent hunting or Netflix or, just to cope with your mortality.
That comes through in 21 Pilots. Those guys, Tyler Joseph, they're Christians, but
Yeah.
So he talked about, he's got a song called Car Radio, and it's about when his car radio was stolen, but how then he's just left alone with his thoughts, and so he's got nothing else to, then he can't hide from himself at that point,
Yes.
and everything starts crashing in,
Yes.
and so he has to, he's like got to get something to fill this gap.
Yes.
But actually, that's what it is really. That's talking of something deeper than
Yeah.
what most people are often thinking about.
Yeah. So maybe you could take a few minutes tomorrow and go into a church and remember that you are dust, and to dust you will return. You will learn wisdom, according to Ecclesiastes 7. Better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have a lovely verse on this?
Yeah, so the one that always strikes me is from Hebrews chapter 2. If I can find Hebrews, here it is. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14, and the verses kind of following that. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. And I think it's just a powerful verse, isn't it? I remember preaching on this verse in the youth group when we went through Hebrews, and just saying, like, I think it is a reality is that people do fear death, but actually what Jesus has done means that we don't need to fear death. So even though I say I think it's the reality that people do fear death, I think, like we've just been saying, people don't fear death in the sense that they're just not thinking about it. Like, there are so many distractions.
Yeah.
And because we don't live in a society where, on the whole, your life can just be taken away from you like that by a sickness or whatever. I mean, it does happen, but I mean, generally we've got good health care and we've got enough food and we're not trying to subsist generally. Actually, we don't think about these things.
Yeah. But even the things that we distract ourselves with, it's because there's a fear of death that's sort of banging the drum underneath.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah, but even if we're not
dancing
aware
to
of
its
that.
tune up there, even if we're not
Sure,
aware that that's
even if
what's
we're not
going
aware
on.
that that's what it is. But
Yeah.
heaven forbid we should have to stop and think about it for a second and realise it's coming.
Right. Right.
If Sunday's coming,
Yeah.
death is coming,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's why we need Sunday.
Exactly.
So,
And, if people want to check out Father John Bear, he's an Orthodox theologian. And if you go to YouTube and sort of look for Bear, B-E-H-R, and death. So look for John Bear and death. There's some fantastic talks he's got where he sort of says, the biggest challenge for us preaching the gospel today is people don't see death anymore. And that A, means that we don't consider our own mortality, and B, it means we don't understand Christ, who reveals the glory of God in his death. Very profound stuff. So John Bear on death. But maybe we'll put some links in the comments. Well, it's been quite a moody start to things. Paul, I think we might need a moody theme. What do you think?
I think so.
Life Lifecast.
Well, there we go. And now for something completely different. So,
Yes, last night we had a look at. We're in a series of thorny questions, looking at problems with the Bible.
Yeah.
Last week we saw that the Bible is huge.
Yep.
It's
And we looked at what was the five problems we thought people had with the Bible. So what was it? There's it's unscientific, it's judgmental, it's homophobic, it's pro-slavery, and the other one.
Forgotten the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clearly, it wasn't that big a problem.
Yeah, we don't have we don't have problems with the Bible. Just so you know, other people do, and how do you respond? So we were encouraging people to have a look at this huge text. Where do you begin? Well, we said, why don't you begin with the Gospels, and then you might think, well, can I trust them?
How do we know this is actually?
I've got the Bible in my
What
hand.
we had.
How do I know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote exactly what I've got here?
Surely it's just been changed down the years.
Has it? Has it, though? Well, let's have a look at a clip from last night's video, and then we'll get to answering 5 questions that commonly come up on whether you can trust the Bible that's in our hands today.
People imagine that the transmission of the Bible is like a game of Chinese whispers. You know Chinese whispers. Apparently Chinese whispers was once called shiny whistlers, then before that tiny whiskers, because, well, think about it. People think the Bible came down to us like Chinese whispers.
I heard Skinner say the teachers will crack any minute.
Skinner said the teachers will crack any minute. Purple monkey dishwasher.
Well, we'll show him, especially for that purple monkey dishwasher remark.
But the analogy with the Bible doesn't really hold. The Bible is like a game of Chinese whispers where the kids write down the message, then at the end they compare the written messages with a dozen other lines of transmission to try to piece together the original wording. The only way you can have a worse party game is by playing leapfrog with a unicorn. Okay, well, maybe don't think about that one. But the Bible isn't like Chinese whispers, and it's not like a puzzle with pieces missing. We don't have pieces missing from the Bible. It's more like we have a puzzle with extra pieces. Lots of them, actually. But these extra pieces are like purple monkey dishwasher. In the vast majority of the cases, we know that they're extra. They don't fit. Bart Ehrman, a best-selling critic of the Bible, says,
"There are more differences in our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament."
That's a big number.
A large number.
It's a big number. Big number.
A very big number.
Bigger number than that.
Big league number.
A huge number. A very significant number.
There might be hundreds of thousands of variants, but really that number is a function of how many manuscripts we have. If there was only one manuscript, there'd be no variations. Would that be a good thing? In the vast majority of cases, the kind of variants we have are spelling and word order variations that are untranslatable in English. Ehrman, to his credit, admits this.
Most of these differences that I'm talking about don't matter for a thing.
In fact, New Testament scholar Daniel Wallace says only 1% of the variants are both meaningful and viable as contenders for what was originally.
That's it. To watch the whole thing, it's up on YouTube at the moment on our Speak Life channel, and it'll be up on YouTube tonight. Is that right? On Facebook tonight.
Yeah. Yes, it will be.
Fantastic. The whole 10 minutes. Yeah, look at those eyebrows. Those comedy eyebrows. That's it. Hey, not quite as good as Justin Briley's eyebrows, though.
No, that was amazing, Justin Briley's ones.
He said everything just in the eyebrows. Like, amazing. So, I thought I could fire some questions at you. Here's some questions that I often have when I try to implore people, go on, just pick up the Bible and read it, and they say, oh, I don't think I can trust what's in here. Let's see if you're ready. So I will play the skeptic, and I will say, I can't trust this. It's just translations of translations of translations of translations, isn't it?
No.
That's how it's done, people. That's how it's done.
Absolutely. So, question 2. No. So we were talking about this, weren't we? Saying that we do have all these thousands and thousands of documents that we go back to. So it's not like when someone knocks together the new version of the NIV, you know, the 2000 and whatever it is now, 11, what was the most recent?
Yeah, it was the 2011.
11, something
yeah.
Like it's not like they just kind of went back to,
let's go back to 1984
and thought, well, let's just change a few bits there.
Which you can't, because it's unimprovable.
That's nearly infallible version. That's what it means, isn't it? So of course they go back to the manuscripts, the kind of the early copies, and use those. And we've got, you know, what is it, thousands and thousands, almost 24,000 manuscripts themselves.
About 6,000 Greek ones.
Yeah, and copies. And it's not just like there is one Like, here's the one
Right.
thing.
Yes.
Here's the one copy of this particular thing. You've got multiple copies that you can then compare.
Yep.
Anna's kind of Greek understanding has
Boffins.
grown.
Right, yes.
They've been able to kind of say, well, actually, this is going to be a slightly more accurate translation. So you're not just translating a translation.
No.
I think people think it's a bit like have you seen the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air
Of
video?
course.
The Google... No, have you seen the Google Translate version?
Ah, right.
So they took the lyrics of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air song, put it through like one language in Google Translate and sung it again.
Yes.
And it was kind of interesting, you're like, a few interesting changes.
Yeah.
And then they're like, and here it is, put through every single language on Google Translate. It's like, I got environmental problems in my territory, and my mama said, I have nothing, like literally nothing like the original. And you see, I think that's what people think the Bible is like. That someone translated it, into another language, and someone went, oh, look, you've put it into French, and we're going to use the French version to make it into English.
Yes.
And that's just not how it works.
But we actually go back to the earliest Greek manuscripts.
Go back to the early manuscripts and work from there. So.
Right. Okay, so question number 2 then. It's just Chinese whispers, in it?
Tiny whiskers.
Tiny whiskers. Shiny whispers. Shiny rizzlers.
So yeah, I mean, people think again, it's just been changed over time, like Chinese whispers. When you play the game and someone says something in someone's ear, and it goes around the room, and then at the end you say, "Well, what was the original thing?" And it turns out it's nothing like it. People think that's how the Bible is, but of course, because we have so many copies at different stages, and you can date when those copies are from based on whether they're written on papyrus or kind of parchment and different things,
and different handwriting,
yes,
capitals,
all capitalized or not
case.
capitalized, and things
Are
like
they
that.
uncials?
Yeah, indeed, caps locks.
Yes.
Just really shouting.
Yeah, Mark was angry.
So you can go back and you can see where changes have occurred, if they have, and it's not also in Chinese whispers. You just have one stream of transmission, don't you? One person passes it to the next, and so on. Whereas actually, what you have is in the New Testament documents is you have a kind of a copy or a kind of early manuscript, and then people make copies off of that. So there are multiple copies, so you can compare maybe the 4 copies made off of one and say, well, there are some differences here. Yeah. But looks like these 3 are all the same on this bit, but this guy's made a different, an error. Yeah. Well, which one's probably right? Yeah. And you can just keep doing that and see how accurate it is. And as we saw in the video with people like Em, and even he is saying most of them don't even matter.
Don't matter for a thing.
Don't matter for a thing.
And they don't matter for a thing. We've got to auto-tune him now and set him to Aerosmith. So what about if people say, question number 3 from a skeptic, it's like a puzzle with lots of pieces missing, Paul, isn't it? Isn't it?
Well, no. It's not like a puzzle with pieces missing, because actually it's like a puzzle having extra pieces.
Right.
Because we've got more pieces, really, than just what we have written down in front of us, because we have so many copies. So again, we can see extra bits or the bits that have changed and stuff. But also, you've got your other kind of documents outside of the Bible, which also quote and use stuff, don't they?
Yeah.
So
Lots of letters,
early church fathers and stuff quote scripture. So again, you can compare those things. So again, it's not like we're sitting there going, well, we don't really know. It's more than well attested, basically.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's like a 1,000-piece puzzle, and you've got 1,050 pieces, and most of the pieces that don't fit for a very obvious reason. They are,
pretty obvious that they shouldn't be in there.
Purple monkey dishwasher.
Purple monkey dishwashers.
Sort of thing. Okay, what if a friend of yours says, but the Bible has been changed. The Bible's been changed.
Well, I think we can see from the copying thing, the Chinese whispers. It's very similar to the Chinese whispers thing, isn't it?
But it's been deliberately,
deliberately
like the
changed.
church has conspiratorially kind of.
Yeah. Well, I think you just want to say, well, okay, well, when was it changed, and ask people to kind of point you to specifically what it is that they think was changed, and then you can again compare it to the oldest kind of documents we have.
This is what Muslims often say, isn't it? The Bible's been changed. I'll often say, look, to a Muslim, look, here's a copy of the Injil. Here's the Injil of John or something, and the Quran even says that the Injil is good to read. Why don't you read what the Quran tells you to read, the Injil? And very often they'll say, well, but the Bible's been changed. And then the question is, when was the Bible changed? Was it changed before the Quran was written or after the Quran was written?
Yeah.
If it was changed before the Quran was written, what's the Quran doing? Like urging you to read a corrupted book? If if the Bible was changed after the Quran, well, let's get in the train and let's go to the British Library and let's see Codex Sinaiticus, and here's a full Bible from like 325 AD, 3 centuries before the Quran, and it's it's in Greek, but it's the same as you've got here.
Identical,
so,
yeah.
So whenever anyone says the Bible's been changed, just ask them when. But also you can ask them how, because the church just had no power until at least 312 when Constantine converts. But the church for the first 3 centuries has no means by which they can kind of control the narrative and get out in front of the story and shut down these sources. Like they're a total persecuted minority. So how are they going to change the Bible like that? And then here's, like, if someone's been reading a bit of Dan Brown or something, they might ask you the question that the church has excluded other gospels. What do you say to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I think when you look at things like, I mean, Thomas is an obvious one, isn't it? That these things, you can tell again from the dating of them that they're not written. They're nowhere near the same level of kind of reliability and historicity as the 4 Gospels we have, written far after, and even the Gospel of Thomas doesn't structurally look anything like.
No,
it doesn't resemble the Gospels at all in a literary style. It's just a collection of sayings of Jesus, dated well after, a lot of things that don't really make sense. And fit together. Same with Judas as well. Again, just dated much later. So no one in any serious capacity would question these things. I mean, they like to throw up in the media every now and again.
Yeah. And we should always remember, here is how the Gospel of Thomas ends. Here is the 141st saying in the Gospel of Thomas. They're all just sayings, so it's nothing like gospel events as in the 4 canonical Gospels. But Simon Peter said to them, "Let Mary go away from us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "Look, I will draw her in so as to make her male, so that she too may become a living male spirit, similar to you." And then he says that Jesus' final line to us all in the Gospel of Thomas: "Every woman who makes herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." The end. So that's the... And what's fascinating is like Dan Brown often holds up, like especially the Gospel of Thomas and the Gnostic Gospels, as the church was always subjugating women, and the Gnostic Gospels were liberating for women. Like, you've actually got to become a man. Yeah. So anyway, those are some questions that people have, and do check out the whole video, because we basically go through Bart Ehrman's book Misquoting Jesus, where he makes his strongest case for not trusting the book that we have in our hands today. And like you hear his strongest case and you're like, oh, I had no idea the Bible was so reliable.
Yeah. It's almost laughable, isn't it, that is the most devastating case you could make. It's literally quibbling over. I mean, there was I think in the video he mentioned 3 occurrences in particular he pulled out, maybe 4. And again, you just look at them and go, it makes literally no difference to anything.
No.
And every Bible, if you go home and you've got your NIV or whatever you've got, you'll probably find that all those verses he mentions, underneath there's a footnote saying either earliest manuscripts don't have this in, or maybe it says this instead of this.
Yeah.
There's no great conspiracy here.
Yeah.
They're not trying to hide the truth.
They
whoever they
yeah,
are,
who are
the lizard people.
Them
guys. So it's strange. It's hard to understand how you get a best-selling book out of that.
Yeah.
Well, it's not strange.
Well,
people want it not to be true.
They want it not to be true.
So they'll. Doesn't it come out that Lutheran satire thing about when people say like Jesus is just based on like Horus or all these other characters?
Right. Yes.
But actually, when you look back in history, you see there's literally no evidence for any of these things. And it's amazing how people who demand evidence for everything will then base their belief system on no evidence whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because it suits them.
Right.
Yeah. So,
as Jonathan Haidt said, if we want it to be true, we ask the question, can I believe it? If we don't want it to be true, we ask the question, must I believe it?
Yeah.
Yeah, confirmation bias at its best. So there we go. So have a look at the full video, and I think actually going into Bart Ehrman's best case for making you doubt the Bible will strengthen your faith hugely. Because honestly, like you probably imagine that the case against the Bible is far stronger than it is. Just have a look at what Bart Ehrman says, and rejoice. Great. Do we have time to talk about Sam Albury at the end. I mean, we have promised life and death, pancakes and penitence, the Bible, and sex, and we haven't done sex yet. Let's do it. Let's talk about. You might have seen a video that we had recently. We put out an interview with Sam Albury, who's got a book, 7 Myths About Singleness, that has come out. It is now released. Mm-hmm. And he talks about 7 myths of singleness. He says, myth number 1, singleness is too hard. Singleness requires a special calling. Singleness means no to intimacy. Singleness means no family. Singleness hinders ministry. Singleness wastes your sexuality. And singleness is easy. All of these are myths, and Sam Albury is going to pop those bubbles one after the other in that book. And I thought it would be good to have a look at the interview that we had with Sam Albury, which we released last week. But if you haven't caught it, here's a few minutes from it. And I think he speaks with a lot of wisdom about how the church can respond to the sexual revolution.
I was teaching on the biblical view of marriage yesterday, and was trying to say the reason this feels so countercultural today is because it's always been countercultural in every culture.
Yeah.
And so it's not as if we've gone from, oh, well, people thought the way the Bible thought, and now culture's changed, and so we're in this new era of panic. Actually, if the Bible really is a voice from outside of human wisdom, we would expect it to have a level of discomfort for every single human culture. There's going to be certain things it will affirm, and many significant things that it will critique and rub us up the way on.
Right. So the Egyptian and the Assyrian views of sex and marriage were totally different from the Old Testament, and vice versa. And the Greco-Roman views of sex and marriage were totally different from the New Testament, and vice versa. So the idea that we need to just get back to, Bible times. Well, there weren't any sort of Bible times embedded in the culture. The Bible was always preaching something different.
And it just means when people say today, well, where we're at in culture, the Bible is unacceptable, so we kind of need to update the Bible somehow and catch it up to where culture's at. I know this was so radical, so bizarre, so unpalatable, and so glorious in the Greco-Roman world. It's just normal.
Right. And yet Christians can be guilty of giving that message, because we can be guilty of appearing to be saying, let's get back to the Garden of Eden, which I think was somewhere around 1956.
Yes.
And that was the golden age. As opposed to, if we actually got back to a New Testament vision of sex and sexuality, it would both challenge the culture and it would challenge the church in the sorts of assumptions that we kind of have. And I wonder whether that's a kind of segue into your book, 7 Myths About Singleness, and whether having a kind of a countercultural vision of church that comes to us from the New Testament, and not just from the 1950s and not just from the 1960s, that actually will actually be challenged in different ways to the way that the world is challenged, but actually maybe the church needs to repent, and maybe we need to repent first when it comes to dealing with matters of sex and marriage and singleness, would you say?
Absolutely, and not least because when people hark back to the so-called golden age of whenever it was, people often do imagine it was sometime in the 1950s, and you've got to think, well, maybe for white people the 1950s was quite an easy time, but you start to look outside, it's just that was not a great period in Christian history, on a whole number of fronts. So yeah, I think you're right. It's a question of not trying to get to some part of historical culture that we can somehow recapture and reproduce, but allowing the New Testament to create in us a new culture, which is what Jesus ultimately was thinking about with his people, making a new humanity. We are to have a new culture that's going to be new in any period of history. And as you say, the way in which the church is conceived of in the New Testament is radical. And I think one of the reasons we are struggling broadly in the evangelical world with the challenges around issues of human sexuality is because we've under thought through and under practiced what the New Testament says church should be about. And there's a tight correlation there, because so much of our confusion about sexuality is a confusion about intimacy. If we were the church the New Testament is calling us to be, we would be feeling very, very rich in intimacy and feeling less angsty about whether we get to be sexually fulfilled or not.
Because the culture is saying that intimacy must mean sex, and therefore to call somebody to celibacy is to deny their humanity, to deny their full flourishing. Whereas you're saying, okay, if intimacy is actually something else and something deeper than sex, then you're actually calling someone to love. You're calling someone to intimacy when you call them to Christ.
Absolutely, and the Bible has much broader ways of thinking about intimacy than we do, as you.
I've always looked up to Sam Albury. Always. If you're listening on the podcast, you'll have missed out on the camera angle,
cinematography.
The cinematography. Sam's auto cinematography, his selfie cinematography.
I've never seen his face in full. Actually, it's
we still have
parts of his face.
He does have a full face all at once. I can testify to that. But speaking a lot of wisdom there. In a culture that just sees intimacy as physical intimacy and can't imagine anything other than that, then to call someone to celibacy is just a denial of their humanity. And how on earth can the church do that? But maybe we're at fault as the church if we are not modeling and offering a kind of intimacy, a kind of family for people. That means that whether you're married or not, you have more intimacy than you would do if you were in a non-Christian relationship outside the church.
Yeah.
It's a big challenge, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not sure we're there yet. Not at all. But it's very countercultural, isn't it? So, and I think generally as Christians, particularly here in kind of the UK and maybe more in the West, we're easily swept up into what the culture is like. So, we kind of run with those things.
Yes,
intimacy is. I don't know. Maybe it's being British as well. Intimacy.
Ooh, right.
So,
yeah.
I care, but I don't want to show you I care.
Right.
Mustn't let you know that.
Yes, yes. You mind telling your face that you're happy?
Yeah.
But your church is preaching through 1 Corinthians at the moment, and you're up to 1 Corinthians 7.
Yeah. So we've had kind of 2 weeks on 1 Corinthians 7.
Or 1 Corinthians 7 for our American friends.
Yeah.
Yes.
For those who are pronouncing it wrong. So
us and Donald Trump, we get it right. Yeah.
So we've been doing 1 Corinthians, and so Steve, our vicar, he'd done 2 weeks now on 1 Corinthians 7, and last time it was on marriage, kind of looking at that angle of the chapter. So it was very much addressed to married people, but single people listen in. This time around, yesterday, it was day before yesterday. Listen in, you married people. This is really about singleness. And actually, I said to him after both of them, I said, these just great. You really kind of knocked it out of the park. With both of them in terms of stuff. And yesterday he referred a lot to kind of Sam Albury's book. He had it with him, he said, he quoted quite a lot because he wanted to make sure. He said, I don't want to just be the smug married at the front, but he was saying, a lot of it, this, we live in a kind of culture which is very much the if only culture. If only I had this, if only I had that, if only I were in that relationship, or if only I weren't in that relationship.
Yeah.
Then things would be okay. And actually he talks about how in 1 Corinthians 7, actually there's this calling to live as you are, to live in the situation you're in, whether you're married or not, to kind of stick with it. And just, I thought he handled the whole thing theologically brilliantly and pastorally brilliantly as well, because I don't think anyone could have come away from it feeling, he didn't include me, or this was offensive to me. And he just pointed out things that I'd never really thought about as well. He said, if you're married, then actually one day you will be single again.
Yeah.
The probability is that half of you will be single.
Yeah. Or dead.
Yeah. Single or dead.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And it's just and he was saying the question is really, if you have singleness, singleness and marriage are both gifts from God. The question is, how do you use them? And singleness being a good thing, Paul saying, he wishes all were as he was, and that kind of thing. He was saying, I think you picked it up from Sam's book, that often in the church, not just in the church, but actually outside the church as well, but we should be aware of it, how singleness is often defined in the negative, so they referring to people as unmarried. So singleness is often talked about as being the absence of the good things you get in marriage, rather than just a good thing in itself. And I mean, he quotes from Sam's book saying how Sam talks about those conversations when you meet someone and they ask, what do you do, etc., etc., and are you married? Do you have a family? And when when he kind of comes out and says like no, he said it almost kind of kills the conversation. People don't really know where to go with it,
right?
Because he said if you've got kids or something, you say, oh well, how old are your kids, and tell us about that, and people just don't quite know what to do. So that can, how that's kind of a hard thing. But I thought Steve also did a great job of, he was saying, why is singleness good? And he looked at it from the positive and the kind of contrasted it with marriage as well. Paul talks about marriage bringing troubles.
Right.
And I thought he just really helpfully said, these are some of the troubles marriage brings. And he said, he'd been a vicar for 16 years. He said the first couple I married are divorced. He could point to loads of couples with difficult relationships, people who don't like each other but are still married to each other, but sticking together. People for whom sickness came quicker than they thought it ever would, and it completely changed their marriage. They stood there and said, for richer, for poorer, sickness and in health, and actually something happened that completely changed where they thought they would be. Children, whether like having children or an inability to have them. Kind of children who make bad choices or had special needs, and again it was just a massive kind of weight on their relationship. Partners or children walking away from the Lord, and you say all these things. He just laid out all these things, and you kind of go, actually, these are all really realistic. These are not just like, oh, it's hard sometimes being married, isn't it? Like, oh, don't get my own way, in a kind of trivial way. These are all big things that are part of people's lives. So he pointed to that side, but he was saying, singleness actually is it frees people up. It shouldn't be a burden. He quoted someone. I missed who the quote was from. He said, "Let not your longing enslave the appetite of your living."
Wow. Which
I thought was a great one. Let not your longing enslave the appetite of your living. So you can spend so much time just being bound up in longing for what's over there or over there, that you don't actually get on and live. And he talked just about all the great ministries that people who are single have had. And he mentioned people like John Stott and Dick Lucas and Vaughan Roberts and Sam, who just wouldn't have been able to do the things they did if they were divided in their kind of things. And he was saying, it's not to say that, and Sam Albury in his book was saying, it's not to say that if you're single you don't have concerns, but you have a different set of concerns. And he was saying, as a single guy, he felt a single person is pulled in fewer directions than the married person who maybe has children and stuff like that.
That's what Paul says. More undivided attention.
Yeah. And I just thought one of the things he said really helpfully as well, and it's not a direct quote from Sam, but the kind of general gist was, when you're single, you tend to compare the downs of singleness to the ups of marriage.
Right.
And then they said if you're married, you tend to compare the downs of marriage to the ups of singleness. So the grass is always greener. But then, interestingly, Sam said he would choose the lows of singleness over the lows of marriage any day. So he'd rather be low and single than unhappily married. He said he saw that, he reckoned that could be far worse. So I just thought it was, it's worth, maybe we'll link to the talk and maybe we put the marriage one in as well from the other week, because they were just both excellent, excellent talks that I thought were so pastorally sensitive, theologically meaty, not lightweight at all, but absolutely accessible, absolutely spoke to everybody.
Great.
So I say go and check them out. We'll put the links in, but if you can't see the links, allsaintscrowborough.org. I don't think it's .uk or .org. Allsaintscrowborough.org. And go to the sermons, Steve Rees. You'll be able to find it there.
He's a good one.
Yeah.
Roger Marshall has commented. He says, I was discussing with a couple of friends yesterday just how couple-centered, wedding-centered, and nuclear family-centered evangelical churches have become. Singles feel frozen out, and same-sex attracted singles all the more so, because there is no pathway to intimacy available to them under the current definition of intimacy.
Yeah, and so part of it was talking about the family, that family thing, and how actually we are very much like that, but how if we are a church family, So obviously 1 Corinthians is moving towards the idea of the church being the body and needing all the people. Steve was talking about, if you are a family, like, do you let the drawbridge down? And do we include single people in our family life as well? Do we holiday with them? He said, no one should really ever go home on a Sunday, kind of not having anyone to have Sunday lunch with.
Right.
Just a really practical thing like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably, that is the case. Obviously, we've seen from that comment there that the churches do need to be better at it.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, the thing I find tricky about that is you don't want to come across as being like, poor you. Do you need? Do you want to come and hang out with us? I don't know. You see how it could come across, or at least you feel it might come across that way.
Yeah, Sam's good about saying, and singles need to actually take the first step in saying, hey, why doesn't your family come to mine for Sunday lunch?
Sure, yeah.
And in the Puritan settlements in New England, like, it was the law that single people couldn't live by themselves. They had to like sort of team up with families. Everybody had to live in a much broader definition of a family than we're used to. And and it used to be that you'd have grandma and granddad living with you at home and that sort of thing. And this whole nuclear family thing stripped down to mum and dad plus 2.2 children is just horrific, really.
But I mean, also, say Steve mentioned at the end of his talk, he said, he knew people who were single, and they would say, so much of my time is taken up with kind of helping my friends who are married, like, and that was almost their ministry. Part of their ministry was loving some of their married friends as well. And he said, and that is a good thing as well. And I know we've been blessed by, particularly I can think of one person we know from church who's unmarried. But she just loves our kids, and the kids have gone out with her for the day, or she babysits and things, and we can go off and do things, and or she's come round at different points. So they have this kind of wider thing. It's the whole, it takes a church to raise a child, that kind of
village. And as you're living in much closer proximity to one another, the capacity for saying if only is much diminished. Because if I'm seeing the lows in your situation, you're seeing the lows in my situation, we're much less likely to say I wish I was in your boat, because no we wouldn't actually.
Absolutely. But I'm sure Steve said it a lot better than I did, and I'm sure Sam's book just goes into even more detail on it and greater depth. So I think all worth looking into.
Definitely, and we've put in the notes, certainly on Facebook, the Sam Albury interview. We've got all 35 minutes of it. It is fantastic to hear his wisdom there. Eric Neal, we might finish with this. Eric Neal says, seems most people don't have an eternal perspective on intimacy. Human intimacy is of this world. Christians are married to Christ for a tad longer period in eternity. Just saying.
He must be British. That's a British understatement.
No, he's Texan.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Just saying.
You'd fit in well.
I think, aren't you, Eric? I think. But yeah, that's running through 1 Corinthians like 3 times. He says the time is short, the time is short, the time is short. Right. So bloom where you're planted, and don't keep looking at the grass on the other side. Brilliant. Well, next week we're going to continue our Bible series, looking at can we trust what the authors actually said about the Bible? So you might trust that this is what the author said, but how do we know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are telling the truth?
Yeah.
We'll have a look at that in our Thorny Question coming out on Monday. This will come out as a podcast on Friday.
Yep.
And what else? What else do people need to know?
The Foundry and support. So we're still looking for interns. We've already got one intern signed up to join us.
We've officially appointed one.
Officially on the books now, so that's exciting. But we'd love to have a few more. So there are people kind of applying. But if you know people, do check out speaklifefoundry.com, and you can find out more information about the internship there. We'd love you to come and join us kind of from September time. So pass that on to people you know, and then think about, if you can, supporting us. We can't do this by ourselves. We kind of rely on you guys for your kind of finances and generous gifts. So if you head to speaklife.org.uk/give, then you'll be able to find various ways to support us through there, and we'd really appreciate that. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, another good show. Pancakes and penitence, life and death, sex and the Bible. We've done it all.
What haven't we covered?
What haven't we covered? You'll find out next week when we'll do it all again on Tuesday on Facebook. Thanks for your company.
Will we? Because we'll be away next week.
Oh, that's true. That's true. We're in a school. Pray for us next week. We are reaching out to a school in Cambridgeshire called Felsted School.
Tuesday lunchtime next week, I'll be speaking on suffering.
Yeah.
Actually, so kind of lunch bar-esque type thing. So appreciate your prayers for that. Big topic, isn't it? So
yes. Okay, so no live cast. No live
but
cast
still a
next
video
Tuesday.
on Monday. Should be a video Monday night still.
Excellent. We know what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Sort of. We
Send
make it up
money.
as we go along. Send money. Send help. Send help. All right. I'm going to go and nurse this
quietly
cold
dying in the
a
corner.
little bit more. Anyway, I'm going to go and take some pills. See you guys.
Cool. Take care, guys. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.